Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. Cold. Xia Xiao woke up from the biting cold, with a noisy sound in her ears, making a mess, making her confused for a while. She was shaking her teeth with cold, her hands and feet were already stiff, but she couldn't stop shaking. The cold stimulated her to recall what had happened. After graduating from university, I was doing complicated work in a real estate company. I often had to follow the project until 2 or 3 at night, and lived a 9-to-5 office life with dark circles, but had to work overtime at night. In the first-tier cities, I am busy from morning to night every day with a salary that is the envy of second- and third-tier cities, but only myself knows that this salary is in the capital. Except for food and clothing, even a 2-square-meter house cannot be bought in a year. Working for 7 years and working as a department manager, Xia Xiao gradually realized the rules of society and the difficulty of life. But there is a kind of perseverance that a girl rarely finds in her bones. In the face of pressure, her way to relieve herself is to go out for a run and exercise every morning, rain or shine. For her habit, the few friends are puzzled. Because Xia Xiao is a lazy girl in her leisure time, except for working hours. She is like a cat and can't wait to sleep on the sofa in her small apartment. But only Xia Xiao knew that she did this because she was refreshed after morning exercises, and she was easily in good condition at work. Only when the condition is good can the performance be outstanding and there will be opportunities for promotion. Secondly, the body is the capital of the revolution. How can we work hard without a body? As for the third reason, it is actually to save money on the gym. The cold winter in Beijing came early, and there was just a snowfall last night. At 5 o'clock in the morning, Xia Xiao got up, dressed and went for a run. Before dawn, a park near the small apartment had been cleaned by sanitation. Xia Xiao was jogging along a cobblestone path, but he heard a call for help. The call for help was not too loud. The public security in this park is usually okay. Xia Xiao is not sure if someone has encountered a robbery or something. At this time, it is still dark. She is a girl who is not afraid of it, but she gradually heard it. The call for help had changed. After all, she couldn't pretend not to hear, so she ran over. After looking for it, I found out that an old man who was doing morning exercises fell into the lake. This park is a bit big, and the lake area is also wide. Usually, to prevent people from falling into the lake, there are guardrails on the roadside, but 2 guardrails on this road are broken at some point. It is estimated that the elderly are walking along the road. During the morning exercise, he slipped and fell into the lake. Xia Xiao immediately lay on the ground and stretched out her hand several times, but found that she couldn't catch the old man at all. After looking around, she didn't find anyone else passing by the morning exercise. At this time, the old man's hands were already a bit stiff, and the lake water was too cold. The old man flopped twice in the lake, and he was about to sink. Even though it was dark, Xia Xiao could see the old man's face clearly with the light of the street lamp in the distance. It was an old man with a very kind face, with deep crow's feet in the corners of his eyes, which shows that he is usually a cheerful person. At that moment, for some reason, there was a kind of pain in Xia Xiao's heart. In the year she first worked, the grandmother who had watched her grow up died of a serious illness. At that time, she was following a project, and the family knew that she could not ask for a holiday, for fear that she would quit her job and go home. You know, working in the capital is decent from the perspective of her hometown. Naturally, the family didn't want her to quit, so they concealed the news from her. It was not until the end of the project that she received the first bonus, and she called home with a smile and said that she wanted to buy a beautiful tang suit for her grandma in the capital for the new year, only to learn that her grandma had passed away for more than a month. At that time, she couldn't accept it at all, and immediately flew back by plane, crying in front of the tombstone for a whole day. This incident caused the biggest regret in her life, so when Xia Xiao saw the old man falling into the water, her mood was hard to describe. She took out her mobile phone from her pocket, called an ambulance, and jumped into the icy lake without saying a word. Xia Xiao's swimming skills are not very good, let alone saving people in the biting lake in winter. She exhausted all her energy to push the old man to the shore, but she no longer had the strength to go ashore. She clearly felt that she was being swallowed by ice water inch by inch. At that time, the only thought was that this life might really be over. But it seems that this is not the case. Looking at this situation, she should have been rescued, right? Except for the cold and trembling, Xia Xiao's mind is much clearer than when he first woke up. Although the sound in his ears is noisy, he can still distinguish it. At this time, I only felt that a kind old man was holding her, crying in grief, and kept calling her, "Little Shahazai. You can't be okay. If you have something, how can grandma tell your parents, mine? Good granddaughter, open your eyes and see grandma." Xia Xiao froze for a moment, and did not react for a long time. "Why cry? Come back from the snow outside and rub your child." It was another old man's voice, with a loud voice and a bad temper, speaking with a majesty that could not be resisted. Xia Xiao recognized this voice in an instant. "Grandfather? That's right, Auntie Zhang. Xiao's grandfather is right. Rub her body quickly. There is a hot Kong in the house, so it will be warm for the child for a while." The woman's voice was anxious, 30 or 40 years old. "Mom, Grandma Zhang, I brought the snow back." There was a running sound, and the girl who rushed in had a tender voice, about 11 or 12 years old. "Tuir, thank you for this child, if it weren't for you, Shahazai would be gone." Grandma cried and thanked, but Xia Xiao felt that someone was taking off her cold and drenched coat. "Hi! Aunt Zhang, we are all from the same village, so what do we do when we say this? Our family Kui'er has been screamed by her sister and sister Xiao'er since she was a child, so she can still scream for nothing," said Aunt Meng'er. Bian also joined hands to help. A group of people took off Xia Xiao's clothes and rubbed her body with snow. Xia Xiao was too shocked to speak. At this time she had opened her eyes, and after a whiteness, she finally saw her hand. It was a pair of children's hands. The little hands were purple from the cold, and a little red when rubbed by the snow. All of this aroused Xia Xiao's childhood memories. She still remembers this scene. It was the winter when she was 9 years old. During the winter vacation, her mother who worked in the city sent her to live with her grandmother. She followed Ms. Meng's sister Kui next to her while playing snow skiing by the small river in the village, but she didn't want to fall into the ice hole. Fortunately, Sister Kui rescued her. But, that was what happened when she was 9 years old, how could it happen now? Under normal circumstances, shouldn't she be lying in the ward of the Beijing hospital now, dripping? Maybe she can still see the family of the elderly she rescued? But now it's so cold that I can't wait to shrink, my body being warmed by the snow, the wall with floral wallpaper in the northern countryside before my eyes, and the old-fashioned monthly calendar hanging on the wall, all telling Xia Xiao clearly. Everything is not an illusion. She was born again and returned to her childhood when the Spring Festival approached winter in 1991. She saw her grandma's kind face again. At this time, her grandma was less than 50 years old. Although she had white hair, she was not seriously ill. She saw the majestic grandfather again. At this time, he had not yet cast his anger on the two daughter-in-laws because the two sons were married and gave birth to daughters. He often cried Xia Xiao's mother secretly. She also saw her father who came back after hearing the news again. At this time, her father had not been laid off, nor had he gone to the southern cities alone because he wanted to give her a good living environment. He had to spend 10 years with her mother after leaving. The two places separated in the year. Naturally, she also saw her mother who had rushed back. At this time, her mother was still very young, and she had not grown up alone, and she did not choose to stay because she had to take on the responsibility of the eldest daughter-in-law, and shoulder the responsibility of taking care of the elderly for her father. Not to mention crying secretly because of missing his father at night. Xia Xiao didn't know why her fate gave her a chance to come back again. She didn't know if it was a reward, she just threw herself into the arms of her relatives and burst into tears. If everything is not a dream, she must change her destiny in this life and make her family live well. Off topic. Hello dears. Under self-introduction, I am Feng Jin Hidden Face, you can call me Jinzi or Jinjin in the future, and I hope to become friends with everyone through this article. New articles need everyone's care, bookmark comments, please don't come carelessly. Hold a paw, hug everyone in a group, and hope that we will be happy in the future. Love you. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books. www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. Xia Xiao was born again in the winter of this year, but after adapting to the rebirth, she could only move a small bench and sit at the door of the old house, watching the goose feather snow outside the door. Wang Xiu sighed. The new year is approaching, and the new year will be 1992. This year was a turning point for the national economy. National leaders delivered important speeches advocating the in-depth development of the economy through reform and opening up. It was also from this year that more and more talents gave up the so-called iron rice bowl, and bold people began to go to sea to do business, thus creating a part of wealthy businessmen. Oh! This is the first few times I sighed today. This year is an opportunity for many people, but for Xia Xiao, this small body, short hands and feet, only 10 years old after the Chinese New Year, what can he do? Little Shazai, you child. What do you do by sitting at the door on such a cold day? Come here and try the chicken soup that Grandma has just cooked. Grandma's voice came from behind. Xia Xiao turned her head and saw her grandma's kind face. At this time, the grandma's white hair is not too much, and the wrinkles on her face are not too deep, but the kindness and love for her under her eyes are the same as before. Since Xia Xiao fell into the ice water, her grandmother broke her to the baby these days. She killed the little hen in the yard, and stewed her soup every day, for fear that she would fall to the root of the cold and fear the cold in winter. This year is not like 10 years later. Whether you want to eat chicken, duck, fish, fruits, vegetables, go to the supermarket to buy it. In the north at this time, the dishes to eat in winter are not so abundant. Cabbage and radishes have to be stored in the cellar. For ordinary families, chickens and ducks can be regarded as rich dishes, and they can only be served on the table during the Chinese New Year. Before the New Year, 3 young hens killed 3 in the past 2 days. Xia Xiao knew how difficult it was, so whenever she picked up the bowl and drank the familiar taste these days, her eyes would always be misted. Perhaps, being reborn as a child is God's blessing to her. After all, not everyone's childhood can be experienced again. Going back to childhood means that life is still on the starting line and everything has not yet begun. She wants to change her destiny, she can always find opportunities. Thinking about this, Xia Xiao laughed. In any case, she must have a good time for the first family reunion after rebirth. On the 29th day of the year, Xia Xiao's parents came back from the city during a holiday and brought a lot of things into the house. Among them, chicken, duck, fish and more than a dozen kinds of dishes are available, all of which are to be eaten a few days during the new year. Xia Xiao leaped forward happily and began to help carry things. Her short body looked awkward and cute with a big bag. Her parents laughed and praised her as sensible. Grandpa listened to the radio in the house, and the parents went into the house to say hello to Grandpa, and the mother began to wash her hands to help Grandma cook the chickens and ducks, preparing for the Chinese New Year tomorrow. The name of the village in my hometown is Shili Village. As the name suggests, it is only 10 miles away from the city. It doesn't take much time to come back from the city. But in Xia Xiao's memory, every Chinese New Year in childhood, my uncle and aunt were always late until dark. At that time, grandma and mother had been on the ground around the pot for a whole day. I'm so tired that I can't stand up straight. Grandpa Xiaoqiuoxi has 5 children. Among these 5 children, the eldest Xia's Highway was born to Xiaoqiuoxi and his ex-wife. His ex-wife died of an illness during the war. The eldest son Xia's Highway got married early and went to work in Qingxi, the capital city. Afterwards, his work was not going well and he somehow got involved with some people in the society. Both father and son had tempers like gunpowder barrels, and they had no peace when they met. Later, Xia's Highway seldom went home, and Xiaoqiuoxi only thought that he did not have such a son. Later, Xiaoqiuoxi married again and had 4 children, 2 children and 2 daughters. The eldest is father Xia Ziwen, the second is the aunt Xia's Hume, the third is the younger sister Xia's Hailan, and the fourth is the younger uncle Xia's Hitao. Xia Shao's father, Xia Ziwen, is honest and honest, while the younger uncle is the youngest of the family. He has been spoiled since childhood and has a big temper. In Xia Shao's memory, the younger uncle Xia's Hitao basically didn't work during the 2 years of marriage, so he went home and asked the old man if he had no money. Little Aunt Zhang Kaiyulan is not a fuel-efficient lamp. It is common to complain and cry for poverty. She always complains about marrying a useless man in her hometown, and then takes the old man's money to her house. The relationship between the couple is not very good, and quarrels are common. Later, Xia's Hitao partnered with someone in the building materials business and made some money. But then there was a woman outside. Until the woman came to the door when she was pregnant, the couple had a big quarrel and divorced. The cousin stayed with her dad, stepmother, and later sister, and was aggrieved. Of course, these are memories of the last life. Now counting, according to Xia Shao's memory, the situation seems not so serious. Counting the time, my uncle and my aunt have only recently been married, and my aunt seems to be pregnant during this year. Sure enough, when it was near evening, Zhang Kaiyulan came back with her pregnant belly and Xia's Hitao. The two didn't take much, so Xia's Hitao came into the house and said, "Dad, Mom, Linlin is a little uncomfortable. We are late to come back." "What? I'm not feeling well." A loud voice came from the back room. Xiaoqiuoxi was listening to the radio in the room, and even Xia Shao's parents didn't come out to check it out. At this moment, I was anxious from the room when I heard this. He hurried out and asked, "You are in the city, close to the hospital, and didn't take Linlin to see? Don't be afraid to spend money. If you don't have money, you can give it at home. You can't delay my grandson." As soon as the words were spoken, the little aunt smiled, secretly took the elbow and abducted the uncle, and the uncle rubbed his hands and smiled. "Look at what Dad said, for your grandson, the son doesn't dare to neglect, isn't it? But it really does. You said, this New Year's Day is 29, and the Chinese New Year will be tomorrow. When I go to the hospital and meet the doctor on duty, I have to say no. Otherwise, people are eager to go home for the New Year." As soon as the grandfather heard this, he walked into the house without saying anything. After a while he walked out of the house and gave it to the younger son with $1,000 in his hand. He said, "Take the flowers first, not enough, and then ask the family." My uncle and my aunt looked at Qian with a smile on his face, and said, "Thank you, Dad." At this time, the monthly salary of ordinary employees in small third-tier cities was only more than 200 yuan, and the price of goods was very low. 1,000 yuan seems to be very small now. At that time, a person did not eat or drink for almost 4 or 5 months. Salary. The couple were naturally happy when they saw the money. And Xia Shao's mother looked at Qian's expression a little bit changed. She was gentle and a rare filial daughter-in-law. Her father-in-law was obviously facing the little daughter-in-law in front of her eldest daughter-in-law. No matter how gentle she was, she felt a little uncomfortable in her heart. What's more, the money was given to the old man by their young couple who came back today, and then they changed hands and gave it to the uncle and the concubine. The mother looked back at his father, and the father laughed and patted his mother's hand to comfort her. In his opinion, the money was originally meant to honor his parents, and since it has been given to them, they will let them do what they want. The mother secretly sighed, and looked at her daughter again, with a sad look in her eyes. These things are like repeating itself, and they did happen in Xia Xiao's memory. But at that time, Xia Xiao didn't quite understand the undercurrent between the adults, and she didn't understand why her mother looked at her with a sad expression. But now, she has the soul of a nearly 30-year-old adult, and looking at what happened back then, she couldn't help but sigh in her heart. Off-topic new articles for collection. Please move your mouse to join the bookshelf. Thank you for your support. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. In Xia Xiao's view, in what Grandpa Fang said, let's not mention anything else, what does the phrase big grandson mean? Her father is the eldest son of the family, Xia Xiao is the eldest granddaughter, not to mention that the little aunt gave birth to a daughter. Even if she really gave birth to a son, that is also a grandson. Grandpa said that, didn't he leave himself out? Xia Xiao's grandfather, Xia Qiuoxi, is a veteran. Soldiers like him can be arranged in the city, and they can also have a good leisure job. They are respected by people and can be a retired cotter. But because of his bad temper, he didn't buy anybody's face. As a result, he offended others and arranged him in the countryside, giving him a few acres of land. This made Xia Qiuoxi feel very unbalanced. He didn't usually plant it, and gave it all to his grandmother, while he brought out the head of the family and drank booze all day long at home. And he has a very traditional patriarchal thought. Xia Xiao once heard his mother say that when she was born, Grandpa heard that she was a girl, and he didn't even look at her for a whole month. Now the little aunt Zhang Kaiyulan is pregnant, and the grandfather puts his hope on the little daughter-in-law, hoping that she can pass on from generation to generation. Ironically, his expectations were destined to fail. In fact, after Xia Qiuoxi married Xia's Highway, the son of his ex-wife, he gave birth to a son, but this son was affected by his dad who was in the underworld all day long, and he was mad all day long. It did not meet Xia Qiuoxi's requirements for his grandson. Expectations were pinned on the other two sons, but the results both disappointed him. As a child, Xia Xiao did not understand the complex world of adults, but she still felt the cold words and indifference of Grandpa. She feels that she is not liked, which is undoubtedly a hurt in her young mind. It has caused her to feel that she is not good enough, some inferiority complex, and her personality has begun to become a little introverted. In the village, she only made friends with Sister Kui Kui from Aunt Meng's house. After school, her friends have been able to count. But it's different now. Xia Xiao has an adult mind, a mature mentality, and has experienced workplace experience. She understands many rules and principles in society. Inferiority complex and cowardice will not do you any good. It will only reduce your sense of existence and make others ignore yourself even more. No one will give you alms for no reason in this world. If you want it, you have to fight for it yourself. Although she is still young now, Xia Xiao will not say that she will change after she grows up. Since she is reborn in this year, she must change now. So, when the atmosphere of the adults in the house was dark, she made a move that surprised everyone. She walked towards Xia Qiuoxi with a smile, took the old man's hand that gave birth to a thick cocoon over the years, raised her face, and said with a sweet smile, "Grandpa, Auntie will definitely give birth to a younger brother. When Xiaoer grows up, she will be filial with her younger brother." Grandparents. The 9-year-old girl's voice still seemed a little immature, with a sweet smile and innocent eyes, but everyone in the room was stunned. The most shocking thing is Xia Qiuoxi. His granddaughter has always been afraid of him. She usually only walks around her grandmother. He doesn't even have the courage to raise his eyes and look at him. What happened today? Xia Qiuoxi looked at Xia Xiao in shock. The child looked like her own son, with white skin, big eyes, a round face and jet black hair. He looked like a beauty. At this moment, he could clearly feel his granddaughter's hand in his palm, and he could pinch out water with a slight grip. Although he prefers sons and thinks that his grandson is more important than his granddaughter, but for so many years, he has accepted even if he doesn't accept it, but he still has the idea of wanting his grandson in his heart, which makes him colder towards this granddaughter. But in the final analysis, they are all from their own blood. At this time, they are stared at by the child's innocent eyes, saying that there is no touch in the heart. That is definitely an ignorance of conscience. Just as Xia Qiuoxi couldn't recover in shock, Xia Xiao's grandma smiled for the first time. "Oh, old man, take a look, our granddaughter is more sensible. At such a young age, she knows that she has to honor her elders when she grows up. It's really my own child, it doesn't hurt in vain." Little uncle and little aunt also laughed. The child's words are the most auspicious. This is a big Chinese New Year, it is undoubtedly the best blessing to be said to be a boy in the belly of a child, and they are naturally happy. The most comforting is Xia Xiao's parents, and her mother changed her sad expression, looking at her daughter's eyes full of approval and relief. The child would coax her grandfather somehow, and seeing what this sentence said made everyone in this family happy. Xia Qiuoxi still couldn't react for a while, and finally gave an and went back to the house with his hands behind his back without a word in the world. Never saw anyone, the child who was innocent the moment before, slowly lowered his eyes, and a meaningful smile passed through his eyes. This is how Xia Xiao handled it as an adult. Although she was angry with her grandfather and aunt and uncle, she couldn't get angry at them. After all, she was only 10 years old even after the Chinese New Year, and she couldn't speak at all at home, let alone her status. The result of the chaos will only make his parents be blamed, accused of being a godfather, and the gains outweigh the gains. Not everything in this world depends on being tough to gain benefits, especially in the face of one's own relatives. Although there are contradictions between each other, they are not deep hatred, so why bother? Even if you are facing a stranger, you still don't hit the smiley with your hand. What's more, when you are facing your relatives, who is still a child. Understanding this principle, Xia Xiao has been extremely diligent in these 2 days, helping to do this and that. She is a child, but she can't help much, but she always makes the elders feel very sensible. On the night of the New Year's Eve, Xia Xiao brought tea and water to his grandparents. Her little mouth was very sweet and her speech was auspicious, making the old man happy. This is the first time her mother Li Wan married to the Xia family. During the New Year, she was not scolded by her father-in-law Xia Guo. Her complicated mood made her eyes full of tears. She could see that all this was due to her daughter's sensibility, and she didn't care much about her sudden changes. After all, the child's temperament changes as soon as it changes, she just secretly comforted herself. This year's New Year's Eve, the family is happy, and the adults are enjoying this rare time. No one noticed that Xia Xiao, who had contributed to all of this, was sighing secretly. These things are too simple for her. She couldn't help feeling a little anxious. She would be 10 years old after the New Year, and she was in the 4th grade of elementary school. But in her view at this time, the primary school curriculum is simply pediatrics, and it is not worth wasting time at all. Is it possible that she is going to skip to junior high school? To be honest, the junior high school courses can also be skipped for her. But she can't just skip to high school, right? That's not a child prodigy, it's a monster. Xia Xiao must think about it. If she chooses to skip a level, what will the prodigy's aura bring to her? It's nothing more than envy, praise, plus the school's exemption of tuition and fees, special rewards and some reports. Compulsory education originally only needs to pay miscellaneous fees, not much money, and special rewards are estimated to be not much money according to the economic level of this year. For Xia Xiao, her biggest regret in her last life, apart from not being able to take a look at her grandmother's death, Another insoluble knot was that in the year she graduated from junior high school, her father's factory closed down and her laid-off father, to provide her with a better life, chose to go to the southern city alone to work hard, and to live apart from her mother for 10 years. A new life in this life, she is bound to prevent this from happening. To put it bluntly, the only way to change this is money. Only with the financial ability can the parents never be separated. Xia Xiao knows in her heart that the thing she urgently needs to do is to do business. But at her current age, it seems that it is time to think and plan. When the New Year's bell struck, firecrackers were set off in the yard. In this beaming atmosphere, Xia Xiao began to meditate. At this time, she didn't know that the turnaround was 2 days later, that is, on the second day of the Lunar New Year. An amazing discovery that day changed her life, and let her create a fabulous and glorious era in business, politics, and even the underworld in the future. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books, www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. On the second day of the Lunar New Year, the two ants returned to their hometown to pay a New Year greeting. As soon as you enter the door, it is naturally a New Year congratulation, and then the New Year's money that the children are most looking forward to during the New Year. Although ordinary families don't make much these years, they are happy for the New Year. The New Year's money is nominally given to the children, but many parents will eventually take the money back from the children. In the final analysis, it's just a matter of exchange of money between relatives. Nothing to lose. So at this time, adults don't care about being generous. Xia Xiao smiled and took the 200 New Year's money from my sister-in-law Xia's Hailan, and thanked him sweetly. "Thank you, aunt." Xia's Hailan smiled and squeezed Xia Xiao's face, with a petting smile in her eyes. "Look at our family's peony grows, white and tender and more lovely. In a few years, she will definitely be a quiet lady. Unlike ours. This, all day long, I know that I am out in the wild, tanned, like a tomboy." Xia Xiao has a black line in her heart. She is almost 30, and her cheek is pinched. This feeling is really, very weird. But she quickly closed her mind and looked aside. Mother also stuffed the New Year's Eve money to her cousin Zhang Ruman, and said with a smile, "What are you talking about? Where is our Manman Bad? It looks like her dad. Soldier style, maybe she will be a female officer when she grows up." My little uncle Zhang Qixiang is an active duty officer and a company-level cadre. There is always a kind of military iron in dealing with people. Affected by him, her daughter's temperament has only been wild since she was a child. It is common to fight with boys. Everyone who sees her will say that she is a boy. Seeing her daughter being praised, my sister-in-law Xia's Hailan suddenly smiled and looked at her daughter. The aunt Xia's Hame on the side of saw it and gave a secret glance, with her expression clearly saying that the relationship between the two of you is good. Xia Xiao's mother Li Wan and Xia's Hailan are employees of a factory in the city, and the relationship between the two is indeed good. It's just that Xia's Hailan is softer than Li Wan. To put it bluntly, she doesn't have much opinion, but she is really kind. Speaking of it, Xia Xiao's parents have never realized that love is the red thread Xia's Hailan gave. She is the matchmaker who made this marriage, so not only the relationship between the two families has been very good, the relationship between Xia Xiao and cousin Zhang Ruman is even better than that of sisters. Zhang Ruman is only 1 year younger than Xia Xiao, and their temperaments are also very different, but the strange thing is that they are very good. Even if I work later and cannot be together from time to time, I often talk on the phone and talk about everything. In contrast, the aunt Xia's Hame's family is relatively distant in Xia Xiao's memory. Aside from anything else, it can be seen from the fact that the New Year's Eve money is given to the children. I saw my aunt Xia's Hame reluctantly said, "Sister-in-law, younger sister, I'm not talking about you. I have told you how many times, and every year, I say, why don't you listen? This thing should not be promoted to give children money for the new year. At a young age, I came for the New Year's Eve money after a few years, and it's okay? I can see such a small amount of money in my eyes, so what can I do when I grow up? Xiaozume is a teacher in the city's #1 middle school. In this era, the profession of a high school teacher is an iron rice bowl, and he has a culture. Others are envious of it. She speaks in a consistent style of teaching students, and everyone in the family listens to her teachings every year, so she gets used to it. Seeing that she was about to start again, Li Wan and Xiao's Hylan gave their daughters a tacit wink and asked the children to go down and play first. Sister, let's go out and set off firecrackers and make snowmen. Zhang Rumen had long been impatient. Seeing her mother's wink, she immediately rushed over and ran into the yard with Xia Xiao. Xia Xiao was dragged and ran, smiling bitterly in her heart. She didn't feel anything when she was a child, and now she is taken out to play by a child, she really has some black lines. Seeing her childhood cousin bravely set off firecrackers in the yard, and ran into the snowdrift to rub snowballs, Xia Xiao suddenly felt like she was in a very distant time and space. Yes, it is an unreal, distant feeling. The cousin at this time would not know that her father returned home when she was in high school, and the job assignment was not satisfactory. The family conditions were not as good as 1 year, and finally she had to go to work elsewhere when she was middle-aged. Even if he was born in the army, his physical fitness has always been good, but because of unloading and loading goods every day, he was exhausted and sick. And my sister-in-law Xiao's Hylan eventually left the sluggish factory and went out to work with her husband in order to make more money for her to study as a graduate student at Beijing University. But the cousin finally failed to enter the diplomatic academy she dreamed of, so she chose the law department. Although this is not bad to outsiders, she is always a little depressed. It is also because she has been a boy since she was a child. She hasn't had a relationship in her 20s and 60s. All the boys she likes treat her like this. Types of non-calling made her often call Xia Xiao to spit out bitterness. Thinking about the memories of these past lives, Xia Xiao looked at the cold and bleak sky of the new year in 1992, then looked down at her hands and feet, and slowly smiled. It feels so beautiful in the carefree era of childhood. And she really feels very good to be able to live her childhood again. But at this time, because of having an adult soul, she cannot truly become carefree. She has a lot of things to do, and has a destiny that urgently needs to be changed. Not only hers, but also her cherished relatives. It wasn't until lunchtime that Xia Xiao and his cousin Zhang Rumen returned to the house. Grandma and the 4 children are sitting on the warm kong. The children are not interested in the things at the table. The only thing they think of is eating. Those chicken, duck, and fish meat are not easy to eat. In order not to be too mature, Xia Xiao also put some vegetables into the bowl, but he ate very slowly, paying attention to the topics of the elders while eating. Men are nothing more than work and business matters, while women are talking about children, food, and clothing, eternal topics. At this time, I heard Aunt Xiaozume say, "Sister-in-law, what kind of clothes are you wearing? It's too red, right? Your skin tone is dark, not suitable for red." Li Wan's face was a little embarrassed when she heard this. She smiled and said, "Sister, I like to wear red, and for the new year, I would like to be festive. If you don't wear it at this time, it looks more gorgeous when you wear it." Xiao's Hylan took a look at her second sister, but did not dare to speak. Zhang Kaiyulan on the side glanced at Li Wan's clothes with a smile, and did not speak. The meaning of watching the show was very obvious. Then you can't wear a big red one. It looks so dark and rustic. In other words, it is a person who works in the city. You should also pay attention to wearing clothes and matching colors. Xiaozume usually teaches in high school. She was used to teaching people, and basically the people who had to talk didn't say anything before she stopped. Finally, Grandma couldn't see it anymore, she coughed, and said, "It's all right, isn't it just a piece of clothing? As for it, it's great for the new year. Eat." Xiaozume licked her lips. She didn't want to annoy the elderly during the Chinese New Year, so she revealed the matter and stopped mentioning it. Xia Xiao, who listened silently, felt bitter in her heart. My mother was born in a particularly bitter age. At that time, the country was in turmoil, and I couldn't get enough food and clothes. The clothes my mother wore when she was a child were all changed by her sister. It is very difficult to wear a new dress. She likes brightly colored clothes, but she is a little shy in her gentle temper. Others joke. Therefore, only during the New Year, she wore the color she liked, and that's it. She was even used by the aunt to run in front of the whole family. Xia Xiao's inner indignation was unspeakable, but there was a faint expression on her face, and a firm light flashed through her eyes. In this life, she will never let her mother suffer such grievances again. At this time, his father spoke up. He looked at his sister Xiaohumei and said with a smile, "The elder sister is right. The black skin and red are really not good looking. But I like to see your sister-in-law in red. I feel very good." Li Wan immediately turned a little red when she heard it, and her eyes moved even more. Xia Xiao took a bite of food, and smiled across her eyes. It wasn't until a while that she raised her eyes again and looked at her aunt Xiaohumei and her uncle Lu Chunyue. Their family started as a fuel processing plant, and later set up factories to help some domestic brand auto companies produce parts. Before Xia Xiao was reborn, their family had established branches in 3 first-tier cities in the province. There are a lot of real estate properties, and it can be regarded as a well-known family in the city. Cousin Lu Yuguang made some money from doing business at home. When he was in school, changing his girlfriend was as fast as changing clothes. Later he got married and his wife was the host of Dongxi TV. The father-in-law was the vice city of Dongxi. Long. The family's vision is high, and the relatives and cousins of the Xia family do not look down on it. They usually speak high evil, and obviously look down on it. Although Xia Xiao understands that human beings are creatures of desire, and everyone desires to stand taller than anyone and be respected by others, but for such a person who has gained power and stepped on his family first, he really has no good feelings, let alone mention respect. The 4 children born to grandparents, the aunt and uncle's economic conditions are not bad, but unfortunately, both of them are not very filial. When grandma was seriously ill, she was supposed to take care of her children. Xia Xiao's mother Li Wan took the old man to her home without saying a word and took care of her all the time. The aunt, as her daughter, only visited twice and brought some things. Talked for a while and then left. Until the death of her grandma, she had not been taken care of by this daughter for a day. Xia Xiao lowered her eyes, and the corners of her mouth were slightly cold. As the saying goes, people are watching the sky, and feng shui takes turns. It's a pity that she is reborn now, and in the last life she couldn't see Xiaohumei's family. Is it true that Xiaohumei's family will really enjoy the end? She stared at Lu Chunyue and Xiaohumei's wife, holding her grandmother inwardly. But at this moment, something shocking Xia Xiao happened. A series of pictures suddenly appeared in her mind. It was night, and the raging fire burned half of the sky. The scene was very messy. There were people running and fighting fire everywhere, and the fireplace seemed to be a company's production line. Then, she saw a short and squat figure, grabbed the hose from the firefighter's hand and rushed up to fight the fire by herself. The person's appearance was clearly Xia Xiao's uncle Lu Chunyue. After, the picture changed again. At this time, the uncle Lu Chunyue and the aunt Xiaohumei visited each other together. The proud expressions of the past were gone, as if they were begging for something in a low voice. At this time, my uncle's temples were already grey-haired, and he suddenly became an old man. After that, it was the cousin and the cousin who were constantly quarreling, and the cousin took the child and fell home and left. Xia Xiao opened her eyes wide and looked at these images in shock. The images were so real as to be vividly visible. In the end, she felt someone push her. Those scenes disappeared immediately. Xia Xiao turned her head and saw her mother looking at herself strangely, "You child, don't eat food and watch what your aunt and uncle are doing," he said while putting a piece of fish into her. "In the bowl, hurry up and eat." Xia Xiao nodded, holding the bowl and lowering her eyes, but her heart kept beating wildly. Just now, what were those she saw? Off topic dear friends, new people and new articles, need support. Now the number of words is still low, and I know there is nothing to comment on, but if it is convenient, let's bookmark it. Data is motivation. Maybe to reveal that this article is divided into two lines, one line is business, and the other line is the aspect of metaphysics and rationality. Combining the two, the heroine will be prosperous, and in short, everyone will not be disappointed. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. After all, he experienced rebirth, no matter how unbelievable things happened. Xia Xiao quickly calmed down. She recalled the scene in her mind just now, and recalled the scene of her cousin and cousin arguing. At that time, the child she was holding was not very old. According to time calculation, it seemed that it was 2 or 3 years after the two got married. So, what she saw just now, is it happening in the future? Why can she see through the future of others? Foreseeing the future, does she really have this ability? Xia Xiao is not sure. After all, she has been reborn, and what she just foreseen will happen at least 20 years later. She doesn't have time to wait for 20 years to verify. Can she foresee what will happen in the near future? Or what happened today? Thinking about this, she suddenly heard her little aunt Zhang Kaiyulan say, "Dad, Mom, I'm going down for a walk. I've been sitting for too long and it's a bit uncomfortable." Xia Xiao heard it and knew that the opportunity was coming, so she immediately looked at the little ant. She concentrated, thinking about what would happen next. In fact, she didn't know if this approach would work, but felt that before those scenes appeared, she had a strong inner desire to see what the ant's family would be like in the future, and then those scenes appeared. So Xia Xiao just gave it a try to see if he could get it right. Unexpectedly, at this look, a picture really appeared in her mind. The little ant fell to the ground, and when she reached the ground, her knees softened and almost fell. Mother Li Wan helped her, and then her grandfather began to reprimand her. This screen flashed very quickly, because things happened very quickly. Zhang Kaiyulan probably had been sitting for a long time, her legs and feet were a little numb, and when she went down to the ground, she let out an ouch, her knees softened, and the whole family screamed in exclamation. Fortunately at this time, Xia Xiao's mother Li Wan was close and reached out to support her. Zhang Kaiyulan was shocked, patted her chest, but Xia Qiuoxi scolded her younger son Xia's Hitao with an ugly expression, "My wife has been 7 months old, so I don't know how to accompany me when I walk down the ground." Xia's Hitao looked wronged, his temper was most similar to Xia Qiuoxi, and he replied at the time, "Dad, I was just listening to my second brother-in-law talking about his business affairs. Didn't he take care of it? Nothing else. What did you say?" Xia Qiuoxi stared. Seeing the father and son at war, Zhang Shuai said, "What are you father and son arguing about during the Chinese New Year? Zhitao, hurry up to accompany your wife. A dispute is resolved." Xia Xiao was completely stunned, and she couldn't help but believe it. She can really see what will happen in the future. But, why did she suddenly have such an ability? Xia Xiao couldn't figure it out clearly for a while, and didn't have time to think about it. Because she soon began to feel dizzy, and her energy seemed to be exhausted, and she was extremely tired. Her appearance quickly caught the attention of her mother and grandma, but she didn't think much about it, thinking that she fell into the ice water a year ago, and her body was agitated by the cold, and it was still not good. So my mother hurriedly took Xia Xiao to the house and slept. After the new year, the parents went back to work in the city. Xia Xiao was still on winter vacation, and school was still a month away, so her grandma kept her, saying that she was going to take advantage of the vacation to make up for her. Knowing that the old man loved his granddaughter, Xia Ziwen, and his wife left some money for the old man, leaving Xia Xiao in his hometown. Later, Xia Xiao began to study her predictive ability. She stared at people when she was fine. From grandparents to Aunt Meng and sister Kui Kui, most of the people in the village later, as long as she saw them, they would become her goal. But after experimenting for many days, Xia Xiao found that her ability to predict is also limited. If she wants to predict a person's future many years from now, she can only watch it once a day. And it takes a long time to watch. The result after the overdraft capacity will be like she did that day, she will be exhausted, and she must rest before regaining her energy. But if she wants to predict what will happen that day or the last few days, she can use it 3 to 6 times a day, depending on the time she wants to see. After studying for a period of time, Xia Xiao completely accepted the fact that she had the ability to predict. Only then did she remember that her own ability seemed to be very similar to that of Heaven's Eye. Sky Eye. According to the Buddhist theory, it has the ability to see events that will happen in the future. In other words, people with celestial eyes can predict the future. The stronger the celestial eye's ability, the longer the future that can be seen, and the higher the accuracy. The so-called precision means that as long as other factors are added, the future state of affairs may not produce predictable results. In other words, if Xia Xiao predicted the future, if external forces intervened, the future could be changed. No matter ancient or modern, everyone wants to know the future, but it can't be bought with money. Thinking of this, Xia Xiao had a flash of light in her mind. She understood what she had caught, but she had to plan carefully how to use this ability. Naturally, this incident cannot be said blatantly. The tree attracts the wind, not to mention that Xia Xiao is just a grass, not even a small tree sapling. She didn't have enough family and power to protect her. Blatantly, it would only bring disaster. If it spreads to the ears of the country, or is looked upon by someone who has other intentions, she can't help it. Xia Xiao is not interested in being a bargaining chip for others. All she has to do is always change the destiny of herself and her relatives. If she does well, she can strengthen herself and let others become her bargaining chips. But she is still young, how can she use this ability? Just as Xia Xiao was thinking deeply, the next day, Aunt Meng brought sister Kui Kui to the door and brought a news. Aunt Zhang, don't you know? Zhou Wang and his second uncle, Professor Zhou is back. Off topic. Thank you for those who collected texts yesterday. Continue to ask for its star eyes. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books. www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. Professor Zhou, named Zhou Binjian, teaches at Beijing University and is quite famous in the domestic and even international academic circles. Few people know that his hometown is a small mountain village in Dongxi, a third-tier city in the north. Professor Zhou was born in Shili village. He experienced the turmoil in the country in the 1960s and 1970s. His parents were teachers in the village and were very educated, but they didn't want to be persecuted to death in that turmoil. After the death of his parents, Zhou Binjian, helpless, went north to the capital to seek refuge with relatives in the capital. After the turmoil ended, he taught at Beijing University and became a teacher. After many years, due to his academic achievements, he was awarded the title of professor, and he has stayed in Beijing and never returned to his hometown. As the saying goes, fallen leaves return to their roots. Zhou Binjian, who is over 60 years old and retired, can't help but sigh with emotion when he thinks of the situation in his youth. This gave rise to the idea of going back to my hometown. After returning to Shili village, Zhou Binjian discovered that the appearance of the village has changed a lot from 20 years ago. Although it is not prosperous, everyone lives in peace and happiness. More importantly, there are mountains and waters in the village, and the scenery is beautiful. This made Zhou Binjian, who had lived in a big city for many years, suddenly fell in love with him, and he even decided to stay in the village to provide for the elderly. Made up his mind, the first thing Zhou Binjian did was to build a tomb and erect a monument for his parents who had duly buried him back then. So after the new year, he couldn't wait to take a few old people from the village up the mountain to choose a place. Professor Zhou's return to the hometown, Grandma and Aunt Meng were full of emotion. Professor Zhou will go back to the village to provide for the elderly this time, and Zhou Wang's family will be better off. Isn't it? How can I say that my second uncle came back? I heard that when Professor Zhou came back, he gave a large color TV to Zhou Wang's family. I heard that there were washing machines and refrigerators. I guess the money was not less. However, Zhou Wang's mouth is so strict that he refuses to speak out. Xia Xiao on the side listened to the words of the two, but her eyes were a little weird, even a little sorrowful. Because Grandma and Aunt Meng didn't know, according to the situation in the previous life, Professor Zhou, who returned to the hometown and wanted to live in the village, died a year later. The cause of the incident was that Professor Zhou's son in Beijing died suddenly in a car accident. Professor Zhou rushed back to the capital in grief, but he did not expect a car accident on the way. This sudden bad luck made the people in the village sigh, but the matter was far from over. After that, Uncle Zhou Wang's family also suffered successive accidents, and inexplicable disasters continued. Some people began to quietly talk in the village, saying that there was a problem with his family's ancestral tomb. It was because Professor Zhou repaired the ancestral tomb and had a problem with the chosen place. Later, Uncle Zhou Wang asked someone to move his ancestral tomb elsewhere, and his family's disasters gradually disappeared. Therefore, once the ancestral tomb feng shui is said, it is more prosperous in the village. As a mysterious incident that Xia Xiao heard in her childhood, it didn't take long for her to forget it. Later, thinking of this incident, Xia Xiao couldn't help but laugh, and felt that feng shui was just nonsense. It is so mysterious, but there is actually no scientific basis at all. It is obviously superstition by the old people in the village. Until Xia Xiao went to university, because she studied architecture, there was an elective course of feng shui theory in the school's elective courses. This made Xia Xiao feel a little strange. She didn't understand why the university offered such courses, so she applied for elective courses. After the contact, Xia Xiao realized that her previous thoughts were too arbitrary and also a kind of ignorance of metaphysics. During Tang Zhengguan's reign, the Tui Bei Tu written by Feng Shui master Li Chunfeng and Xiangshu master Yuan Tiangang, the whole book predicts the prosperity of future generations and predicts important events in the later Tang dynasty and later dynasties. Not only the order of the dynasties is complete. It's accurate, even the big events that happened in the dynasty are not false. Including the Taiping Heavenly Kingdom, the entry of the Qing troops, the Japanese invasion of China, etc., all of them were unsuccessful, and they were amazing. Since then, Xia Xiao has developed some interest in the mysterious and broad knowledge of his country. The so-called metaphysics is an Eastern philosophy based on the research, interpretation and extension of Laozi, Zhuangzi, and Zhuyi. Feng Shui is a branch of metaphysics and Yili. In the era of national turmoil, when vigorously introducing Western culture, the Chinese radically devalued their own culture, believing that the West is scientific and their own is superstitious, leading to the decline of Eastern philosophy, and even today people misunderstood. Take the tarot divination and astrology that has emerged among students and white-collar workers in later generations. Many people believe that these beliefs are terribly accurate, and they feel that they are superstitious when they hear about their own physiognomy and hexagrams. In fact, the tarot card emerged in the Middle Ages in Europe, and its status in Europe is equivalent to that of China's Book of Changes, but the Book of Changes originated in the Shang and Zhou period, more than 1,000 years earlier than Europe. While we are still abandoning and criticizing ourselves, Western countries have begun to include the Chinese Book of Changes into the research category, and believe that it is not only scientific, but also extensive. Take Feng Shui theory as an example. It can be said to be a natural integration of multiple disciplines such as geophysics, hydrogeology, cosmology, meteorology, environmental landscape science, architecture, ecology, and human life informatics. Subject. Many people don't believe it. It's because metaphysics is so profound and difficult to understand. This line is about inheritance, but nowadays, there are very few people who really have inheritance. In other words, there are very few people who really understand. Most of them are self-study and renunciation, commonly known as sticks. In addition, many of them use the purpose of making money, which is harmful to others and deepens the misunderstanding of many people. In fact, no one dared to offend a true feng shui master in ancient times. Because these people easily move their fingers, they can kill people invisible, and even delay future generations, which is extremely tragic. Today, this kind of thing is not too mysterious. In the scope of science, this is a kind of geomagnetic field. That is, use the placement of everything to change the magnetic field of a certain place, so that the people in it will be affected by it, whether it is good or bad, and it can even kill people silently. The feng shui theory of the ancestral grave, in the eyes of today's xiaoshao, has a certain truth. The parents of the body, the skin, the ancients paid attention to the word qi, which is similar to electromagnetic waves in modern scientific explanation. Parents and children have similar electromagnetic waves, and mountains and rivers are all born of qi, but this qi is good and bad. If the ancestors are buried in places where the anger gathers, the children will be affected. Recalling these, Xiaoshao once again remembered the elective courses. At that time, she also thought that she had time to return to her hometown. She must find the place where Professor Zhou's family buried her ancestral grave and make a field inspection. But it was naturally because of various reasons that it failed to take place. It's just that Xiaoshao didn't expect that, but Rebirth gave her a chance to find out. Unexpectedly, she would see Professor Zhou again. I remember that Grandma took her to visit Uncle Zhou Wang's house. Although she and Professor Zhou had only one side, the old man left her with a kind and profound impression. Now, all tragedies have not happened to this old man. Xiaoshao suddenly felt the desire to meet Professor Zhou. Such a famous domestic scholar, such a kind and loving old man, should not be suddenly killed in a year. At this time, I heard my grandma say, "Someday we will go to Zhou Wang's house and meet Professor Zhou." The professor at Beijing University is a literate man who has seen the world. Aunt Meng said, "That's not true, but it won't be done today." When I came out, I heard from my family's guy that Professor Zhou had just taken a few old people from the village and went up the mountain. Xiaoshao listened, drank the chicken soup in the bowl in a few mouthfuls, put down the bowl and said, "Grandma, I want to go up the mountain." Off topic, dear friends, I tried my best to explain everything about Feng Shui and other things in this article in a more scientific way. Of course, there are some things that I can't explain. Everyone's consciousness and concept are different, and I can't change it, so I don't stop those who read the text from thinking that metaphysics is superstition. But those who think so, please don't criticize me with this. I write articles for the sake of good-looking stories, like urban supernatural powers, tomb robbers, or ghost stories. There is no need to care about whether these really exist. Everything is just for help. The story is pretty. I am not the first author to write about these things, nor will I be the last. So, please don't be true. As an author, the only thing I can do is to convey a kind of life attitude toward the good and upward in the article as much as possible. I used to be a fan of tarot cards and horoscopes. I have studied a little bit. Many girls around me like them. I believe there are many people who like them. Welcome to communicate. Finally, please collect. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books, www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. Shili village is close to the city. There are only 200 households in the village. It is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. Although the village is small, the scenery is excellent. The weather in the north is still very cold after the Chinese New Year. Most of the snow that fell a year ago has melted, but the top of the mountain is still white. Two little girls are walking on the mountain road. Lu Qiqui is 12 years old this year and 2 years older than Xia Xiao. She grew up in the village. Climbing mountains is common for her. Her height is considered tall among girls of the same age. He came up quickly, with a hot temper, and warm-hearted. After climbing a few steps, he turned back and pulled Xia Xiao. Seeing her walking awkwardly, he couldn't help but laugh. Xia Xiao's face was full of black lines. When she heard that she was going up the mountain, her grandmother told her to go back to the house and add 2 more thick sweaters, and she wrapped a little red cotton coat around her. God knows she looks like a bun. Have you ever seen Baizai climb a mountain? It's not bad if you don't roll down. However, as long as he can go out, Xia Xiao doesn't care so much at this time. Shaizai, look! I saw Professor Zhou and them. Ah, Uncle Zhou Wang and the village elder Uncle Wang are also here. Lu Qiqui said, pointing away. Xia Xiao looked in the direction she was pointing. The village was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. The villagers planted all the land on the mountain in front. The back mountain was barely farmed, and there were usually woods. There were several small natural lakes in front of the mountain. Several reservoirs have been repaired. Looking from a distance, about 5 or 6 men are standing in front of a small frozen lake, pointing to the mountains behind. Lu Qiqui and Xia Xiao ran over. People in the village knew both of them. Zhou Wang saw them and said, "What's the matter with your kids?" Xiao Zhi said he wanted to go up the mountain to see Professor Zhou, so we came. Lu Qiqui didn't know how to lie, so he answered whatever he asked. Xia Xiao almost helped her forward, so her uncle and uncle yelled in a circle before bowing to one of them, who was about 60 years old and grizzled, and shouted, "Hello, Professor Zhou." Professor Zhou laughed cheerfully, "Whose child is this? It's very polite." He saw that Xia Xiao's powder ball was so cute, he couldn't help teasing her. Zhou Wang next to said, "This is the granddaughter of Uncle Xia's family, named Xia Xiao. Next to this is the daughter of Mrs. Lu, Lu Qiqui." Professor Zhou nodded, and asked the ages of the two of them, and then asked them to stand back and not to approach the frozen lake in front of them. Then they talked to a few people again. "I think it's pretty good here, it is good for hiding the wind and gathering energy," Professor Zhou said. The village elder Uncle Wang and a few people followed and nodded, obviously admiring and respecting Professor Zhou. Whatever he said, it was naturally what he said. "Second uncle, you have the final say about repairing the ancestral tomb. You said it's good here, let's repair it here. Now the soil on the mountain is still frozen, it is not easy to start construction, we will start to do it when the spring begins," Zhou Wang said. Xia Xiao frowned weirdly beside. To be honest, she really didn't understand feng shui. Although they had taken elective courses when they were in college, they studied architecture-related, mainly studying modern home feng shui. They emphasized the coordination between man and nature as much as possible, and how to arrange the furniture to make people physically and mentally comfortable, easy to understand. As for the esoteric theories, I haven't learned the least. In Xia Xiao's opinion, the place chosen by Professor Zhou is quite good, with mountains and rivers. How could it cause so much lethality later? Thinking about this, Xia Xiao couldn't help but look carefully at the place chosen by Professor Zhou. Seeing this, she almost yelled out in shock. The reason is that, in Xia Xiao's eyes, the landscape in front of him suddenly changed. To be precise, mountains are still mountains, and water is still water, but at this time it is covered with a layer of gas. These gases are divided into 2 colors, one is dazzling white and warm like sunlight, which makes people very comfortable. The other is grey and cold, making people feel uncomfortable just looking at it. Could it be that this is the yin and yang in the heaven and earth yin and yang that the ancients said? The theory of yin and yang and the 5 elements exists in the ancient Oriental culture. Traditional Chinese medicine pays attention to the harmony of yin and yang. It can be seen that the theory of yin and yang is not groundless. Xia Xiao didn't know if she saw yin qi and yang qi, but she saw that the place that Professor Zhou chose at this time was indeed very bad. The grey gas gathered here, and even the concentration was extremely high, which made people feel very uncomfortable. This is probably the so-called gathering place of evil spirits, right? It's no wonder that Professor Zhou's family in the previous life was so tragic in the end. Regardless of the fact that his sky eye actually has such a function, seeing that Professor Zhou has identified this place, Uncle Zhou Wang has even decided to start work in the spring, Xia Xiao couldn't help but feel anxious. But she knew that she couldn't tell the truth, and even if she said it, no one would believe it. I was afraid that she would have to be regarded as a lunatic. Therefore, she was anxious to gain wisdom, grabbed Professor Zhou's clothes corner, and asked, "Grandpa Zhou, you just said that Tibetan wind gathers air, what is Tibetan wind gathers air?" Professor Zhou was stunned, but the village elder Uncle Wang on the side reprimanded, "Children, ask so much what to do. Your generation talks about science, these feudal superstitions, don't ask." "What's this?" Feng Shui theory comes from one of the 5 classics, Zhou Yi, so far no one dare to say that it can be fully understood. It is undeniable that there are some superstitions in its development, but there are many things worth studying. Locally, Western countries have begun to attach importance to our culture. We cannot stop at the point where we belittle our own culture, otherwise we will regret it and be laughed at in the future. Professor Zhou cannot be blamed for being excited. His parents were persecuted to death during that turbulent era. In that era, it was not only his parents who died, but also destroyed a lot of culture worthy of inheritance. Later, Professor Zhou and several scholars set out to study and restore these traditional cultures, but when they interpret the Book of Changes, they all felt strenuous and sighed with the difficulty of inheritance. Our next generation, even if they cannot pass on the wisdom of their ancestors, must at least have the most basic knowledge of Chinese learning. They don't need to understand, but they must not be ignorant. Professor Zhou was serious, and Zhou Wang and several elderly people in the village immediately refused. Dare to say anything more? At this time, Professor Zhou picked up Xia Xiao, restored a kind smile, and pointed to her, "Come on, son, Grandpa Zhou pointed it out to you. Look at this mountain, it looks like a dragon." Xia Xiao does not understand Feng Shui, but he knows that there are such sayings as dragon veins and dragon power in Feng Shui, which is actually a very vivid appearance. But she is not concerned about these. Before, she stood on the ground with limited vision. Now she is hugged by Professor Zhou, her vision suddenly widened. She glanced at it and saw Shili village is surrounded by mountains on 3 sides. The village is not large, and there is a continuous road behind the mountains. Several mountains were cut off because of the excavation of the highway. The mountain selected by Professor Zhou was extended, and it happened to be cut off by that highway. Even though Xia Xiao didn't understand, she also knew that this kind of damaged mountain must not be so good, not to mention that it was broken. Xia Xiao's eyes flashed, pretending to be a child innocent, pointing to the highway and saying, "Dragons have no tails." "There is no tail." Professor Zhou was stunned. He looked down Xia Xiao and looked down the road for a while. He suddenly looked terrified. "Oh! Not good. Why didn't I pay attention to this highway before?" His call shocked Zhou Wang and several old people in the village, and quickly asked, "Why is it bad?" Professor Zhou was a bit incoherent, it almost caused a catastrophe. "This place is not good, it's not good. Change place, change place." "Hey? Change the place? Second uncle, didn't you say that this place is good for gathering wind and energy?" Zhou Wang asked puzzledly. "What do you know? I'll change it, you just change it." Professor Zhou put Xia Xiao down with excitement, and looked at her carefully, his hands were shaking. "My child, thanks to you, or else you'll be in trouble." You are such a lucky star. This makes the person next to him even more confused. A child, what does it have to do with her? However, Professor Zhou took it seriously and immediately went to another place. Xia Xiao and Lu Qiqui followed until Professor Zhou chose a satisfactory place, and after Xia Xiao saw it, she found that the white yang energy gathered here, and she was relieved. Professor Zhou turned around and hugged Xia Xiao again, as if to feel at ease. Let her look at it again. This move made Xia Xiao dumbfounded, but the village head, Zhou Wang, and others who looked aside were about to drop their jaws. How could this professor of Beijing University, a well-known scholar at home and abroad, take a child's words so seriously? It's good here. Xia Xiao nodded as if, black lines all over his forehead. After the site was selected, the village chief and Zhou Wang began to discuss the opening of the spring, and the group went back to the village while talking. Just after the group had left, in a built house on the back mountain, an old man with grey hair was sitting in a wheelchair, looking in the direction of the group, and muttering in surprise. Divination this morning, it is clearly not the result. Could it be that the heavens here are disordered, and the fulfillment is here? Who is it? Who has this ability? Hey! Is it, the girl? Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. Uncle Wang, the elder of Shili village, is highly respected by the villagers in the village. Naturally, there are reasons for his fairness, but more importantly, it is because he has a son who is the head of the cadastral section of the Land and Resources Bureau in Dongxi. Old Uncle Wang is naturally proud of having such a son. But his son sometimes caused him headaches. 1 year ago, a foreigner came to the village. He was an old man in his 60s. He was in a wheelchair with his legs disabled. The aura on his body made Uncle Wang's memory still fresh. The old man clearly felt the breath of a world-famous person, but his eyes were not angry and mighty, as if he glared at him and his legs were going to weaken. Such a person was never seen by old Uncle Wang, who had never been to Dongxi in his entire life, but this person was brought back to the village by his son Wang Xiudong. His son asked him to build a house on the back hill of the village, and to open up a road with stone steps for the elderly to go up and down the hill. From now on, the old man will live in the village. Regarding his son's request, old Uncle Wang was shocked. Can the land in this village be used by an outsider? This, the villagers have to have opinions. The son only said, Dad, you just listen to me about this matter. This matter is ordered by the superior, and your son is also obliged to do things. Well, in any case, please leave it alone. The city will coordinate the specific matters. Old Uncle Wang was even more surprised when he heard it. Will the city take care of it? How big is this person? In his cognition, the city can pay attention to it, so naturally it is a big man. He didn't dare to say anything, he just did what his son said. This matter was really as the son said later. Within a few days, a document was issued in the city, saying that this old man had invested in many projects in the city and made a great contribution to the development of the city. Because the scenery in the village is very good, he wants to live in the village to recuperate. The land in the village was not used in vain, and every villager was given a subsidy. The subsidies are generous, and they are also given every year. The villagers naturally had no opinion on this matter, and the old man also lived in the mountain ever since. In the hearts of the villagers, this old man is an entrepreneur and a big man. Therefore, no one would dare to bother him. Even the children in the village were told that no one should be mischievous and make trouble outside the house, otherwise they would wait to go home and be beaten. In fact, this is a small calculation in the hearts of many villagers. They were afraid that the old man would not live in the mountains quietly and left in a huff, and the generous subsidies that year would have been lost. The old man lived in the village for a year, and during this period he has never seen him go down the mountain. All the food and daily necessities are regularly sent by old Uncle Wang. As time passed, old Uncle Wang gradually got used to it. Anyway, he just went to give things away, and the old man had no other requirements. But what is strange is that when he went to deliver the things the day before yesterday, the old man asked him about the village in an unprecedented way. The question was about how he accompanied Professor Joe to select the ancestral grave that day, and I inquired carefully about the details. This matter makes old Uncle Wang feel very strange, but after this there are even more strange. Before he left, the old man actually asked him about the granddaughter of Lao Ziatu's family, Xia Shao's birth date. Although old Uncle Wang is the head of the village, how would he know the birth date of a girl? In desperation, he had to invite Xia Shao's grandfather, Xia Qiuoxi, to his home for a meal. He knew that Xia Guo liked a few drinks, and the two of them drank a lot of wine during the banquet, and then they slowly came out of the conversation. Sent the 8-character birthday to the past overnight. When waiting for him to go again yesterday, the old man actually made another request. He wanted to see Xia Shao. What is this called? Old Uncle Wang shook his head again and again. Xia Shao was a 10-year-old female doll. This was asked about the birth date and asked to see each other. Is it possible that this old man has a grandchildren in his family, and he wants to decide whether to kiss the doll or not? If this were the case, it would have been a lot of luck for their old Xia family. This old man is a big man who even respects the leaders of the city. Sighed with emotion, but old Uncle Wang did not dare to neglect, and went straight to Xia Qiuoxi's house after coming down from the mountain. Walking to the door of Xia's house, old Uncle Wang was stunned. From a distance, he saw Zhou Wang leading Professor Zhou and walking towards this side, the two of them still carrying things in their hands. Looking closer, Zhou Wang was carrying 5 bottles of mutai, 5 good cigarettes, and 2 large yellow croakers. Zhou Wang saw old Uncle Wang standing outside the wall of the Xia family courtyard. He was also taken aback, and asked, "The village chief, why are you here too?" Old Uncle Wang asked, "What are you guys?" Zhou Wang immediately showed a wry smile when he heard it. "Isn't it for the first 2 days? My second uncle always talks about it these days. Thanks to the little girl Shaozai, our Zhou family escaped a catastrophe. Isn't that? Thank you today." Hey! Old Uncle Wang's eyes were almost staring out. He was also there that day. Can this kid take it seriously? After much deliberation, I can't figure it out. I don't know how a small female doll came into the eyes of the professor of Beijing University and the old man from Hushan. This is really... Old Uncle Wang shook his head and said nothing. He yelled twice into the room from outside the courtyard. After a while, Xia Shao and Grandma Zhang Shuai greeted him. "Grandpa Zhou." Seeing Zhou Wang carrying something in his hand, Xia Shao knew why the two had come. She didn't show it on her face, but she praised Professor Zhou's character in her heart. Although it is indeed Xia Shao's credit that saved the lives of Professor Zhou and his family, most people would consider this to be a coincidence, and would definitely not attribute the credit to a child. Professor Zhou apparently liked Xia Shao very much, and when he saw her, he hugged her up, staring at Xia Shao's grandma. After reacting, he hurried into the room and called the old man listening to the radio on the Kong. Xia Qiuoxi is a hard-tempered man and is famous in the village. Even if it was Professor Zhou, he didn't seem to be very enthusiastic. He just invited people into the house, looked at Zhou Wang's tobacco and alcohol on the table, and said, "Wangzi, they are all from the same village. You and your second uncle came to sit down, why are you still bringing things? Alas! Although your uncle Xia is a veteran, but you know these days, life is going well, no one of us veterans like us cares about it. That is, Professor Zhou. Cultural people are cultural people. When you return to the village, remember to come and see me, this old man. Alas! Much better than the officials in the city." Zhou Wang snorted and almost didn't laugh. Old Uncle Wang looked embarrassed, and they all knew that Xia Qiuoxi had misunderstood. He thought that Professor Zhou came to see him specially. But in fact, they came for the face of his granddaughter. Professor Zhou smiled elegantly and did not say anything. He just echoed, "The country has always been concerned about veterans. We have all come from the war era. No soldier was on the front line to defend our country. Your happy day today." Speaking of Xia Qiuxi's heart, he was commended for his bravery on the front line back then. The military medal has been hung at home by him, but because of his hard temper, some officials can't bear it. He abruptly cancelled the treatment that should be given to him, and it ended up now being farming at home. The veteran cadres who retired from the army the same year as him now live a leisurely life in the city and are respected. Every time he meets these old comrades in arms, he loses his old face. As if meeting a confidant and friend, Xia Qiuxi talked about the old things of the year, and Professor Zhou did not show any impatient expression when he heard it. He was very well trained, and even chatted with him. In the end, the two of them calculated their ages and discovered that Professor Zhou was 10 years older than Xia Qiuxi, so they were called brother and brother. "Brother Xia, let me tell you that when our generation has reached this age, many things should be looked away. If you are really depressed, then look at the next generation. As the old saying goes, feng shui takes turns. Children, this generation is not necessarily inferior to those people." Professor Zhou persuaded, and while talking, he looked at Xia Xiao, who was sitting nicely on the side. "Your granddaughter is well educated. I saw her a few days ago. This child, regardless of his young age, is polite, and quite clever. When I came back from Hushan that day, I asked her about the world. It's a small country that is not well known. She can even speak out about the famous capital city, but it's rare." Professor Zhou also did not mention the site of the ancestral tomb repair that day. He knew that there had been a deep misunderstanding of feng shui in China. People in this profession were often referred to as God's ticklers and had a bad reputation. This profession has always been difficult to be elegant in the country. Xia Qiuxi has a good face. If you want to speak it out, he has appointed Xia Xiao to be blamed for not learning well at a young age. Furthermore, Professor Zhou actually thought that what happened that day was a coincidence, but even if it was a coincidence, it was true that he benefited from the child's unintentional words. So he still came to thank you today. If he doesn't come, he always feels owed something in his heart. Xia Qiuxi met a confidant today, and when he vomited the unhappiness over the years, his mood was much better than usual. After hearing that the granddaughter was praised by the professor of Jingcheng University for her scholarship, she naturally felt that she had a face, so she nodded to Xia Xiao. Her eyes were rare and relieved, and she even looked at this granddaughter more pleasingly than before. "My wife, go and fry 2 dishes. Today, Brother Zhou is coming home, I have to have 2 drinks with him," Xia Qiuxi said. Zhang Shuai was a little embarrassed about the tobacco and alcohol that he received today, and as soon as he heard this, he hurriedly responded, turned around and made the 2 yellow croakers that Zhou Wang had brought, and took out the meat, vegetables and eggs at home. "Prepare to fry a few more dishes." Old Uncle Wang could not sit still for a long time, for fear that the old man on the mountain had been waiting for a long time, but he never found a chance to interject. When he heard that Lao Xia's family was about to cook and drink, he coughed and said, "Cough. Lao Xia Jiu, in fact, I came today because there is an important thing." Xia Qiuxi, Zhou Wang and Professor Zhou were all taken aback. Zhou Wang thought that old Uncle Wang happened to pass by the door of Xia Qiuxi's house. Didn't expect something really happened? It's like this. Do you remember the people who lived in the house on the back mountain in our village? So don't you remember? Zhou Wang was energetic as soon as he heard it. That's a big man who even gave some face in the city. Isn't he having bad legs and recuperating in our village? But since he lived in Hushan, I haven't seen him come out. Old Uncle Wang, you often go to give things to that person. Did he or he die? Pa. What are you talking nonsense? Old Uncle Wang almost slapped Zhou Wang on the head. If he is dead, you old uncle, I will give you things to ghosts all day long. Zhou Wang shrank his neck and muttered, "Why don't you see a big living person going down the mountain for a year? It's so mysterious. Don't guess, this person is alive and well. And when I came to Lao Xiatu's house today, it was this person who asked me to come." Old Uncle Wang said. "Hey? He asked you to find old Uncle Xia?" Zhou Wang looked at Xia Xuoxi in amazement. "Old Uncle Xia, when did you know such a big man? Why did you hide it, and didn't tell us a word? Who knows this kind of person? Don't you just rely on the amount of bad money? An outsider uses the village land, but also needs the city to send down documents. I don't know how many shady transactions are in it. How many years have passed since the founding of the country? It started corruption. Now these officials and rich people, I don't want to know." Xia Xuoxi lowered his face, and the bad temper came up again. Old Uncle Wang gave Zhou Wang a look at the situation. Although he saw that Xiaoguo's stinky temper was offending again, the words had come to this point and he had to go on. "Oh, not looking for Lao Xiatu? Hey? Not looking for old Uncle Xia?" Zhou Wang's eyes widened. "No." Old Uncle Wang waved his hand, and turned his gaze to Xia Shao as Zhou Wang, Xia Xuoxi and Professor Zhou looked inquisitively. "I want to see Lao Xiatu's granddaughter. Mr. Tang asked me to take Xiao Shaizai up the mountain. Off topic, the collection rose a lot yesterday, thank you. Keep asking today, favorite Baji Amor. Can the collection increase by 30 today? If you can, I will add more tomorrow and the weekend. Please move your fingers to add the text to the bookshelf. Please support the new text, _. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books, www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. The paved mountain road is lined with dense pine forests. Even in the cold early spring in the north, there is a lush scene. There are two people walking down the mountain, one old and one young. The old man is naturally Uncle Wang, and the young one is naturally Xia Shao. Old Uncle Wang walked ahead, secretly looking back at the girl following. He finally persuaded Xia Xuoxi and agreed to take Xia Shao up the mountain to meet Mr. Tang, but this child is too strange. He didn't even ask a word along the way. Generally speaking, children are very curious, especially when they are taken to meet strangers. Why should they keep asking all the way? Old Uncle Wang was the head of a village, and he could be regarded as a person who watched Xia Shao grow up. This child was courageous since he was a child, not very talkative, and was led to meet strangers. It should be very resistant. No matter how uneasy it is, or cry twice. But look at this moment, she is walking on the mountain road in a leisurely look, looking at the pine forests on both sides of the mountain road from time to time. Her expression is cozy, and her mouth is still smiling. In the afternoon, the sunlight in the mountains fell on her finely, giving birth to an elegant demeanor. The demeanor instantly made old Uncle Wang think that he was dazzled, whereas a child, he is clearly an adult. Moreover, even adults, in the eyes of old Uncle Wang, have never seen a few of them like this. Old Uncle Wang shook his head. Xia Shao, this child, after a year, how has his temper changed? He shook his head and led Xia Shao up the mountain, but he didn't know that the reason why Xia Shao was so calm was because she had predicted what would happen next with the eyes of the sky a long time later. Furthermore, after experiencing rebirth and the sky eye abilities, in Xia Shao's view, this matter was really not enough to make her panic. Sure enough, after a person has experienced some major changes, his character and perception will grow. She is now indifferent. I'm afraid she can't even compare to her last life. The two walked on the mountain road for about half an hour, and they saw a house. The house is hidden in the forest halfway up the mountain. Xia Shao, who studied architecture in his previous life, concluded that it was a traditional courtyard house with a single glance. Moreover, looking at the depth of the courtyard wall, there were 3 entrances. At this time, the door was concealed, and old Uncle Wang respectfully yelled twice at the door. There was no sound inside and no one came out. Old Uncle Wang wondered, what's wrong? The door is not closed, and no one answers yet? Isn't something wrong? This old Mr. Tang is also getting older, and his legs are disabled. He is the only one living in this house. It is not impossible to say that he suddenly falls ill. But if something happens to him, old Uncle Wang can't afford it. The more he thought about it, the more he was afraid. He pushed the door and rushed in. Ran for 2 steps, only then did he remember something, and then turned around and said to Xia Xiao, who followed up, "You stay here, don't run around." Xia Xiao nodded, and old Uncle Wang ran inside to check. Seeing his disappearance, Xia Xiao slowly laughed. She can guarantee that Mr. Tang is okay, because in the scene predicted by the eyes of the sky, there is a scene of an old man in a wheelchair talking with old Uncle Wang, which shows that Mr. Tang is all right at all. Xia Xiao couldn't figure out why this old man was going up the mountain to see him by herself, so she was so mysterious at this time, she simply didn't guess. Anyway, after a while, why bother? She is quite interested in this house. Because she has keenly felt an indescribable sense of comfort since she just stepped in. In this era, industrial pollution is still very small, especially in rural areas, where the air is extremely fresh. But this house gave Xia Xiao the feeling, but the air was fresher than the mountains outside. Xia Xiao couldn't help but lift the sky eye's ability. She was a little surprised at this look, and she saw that the house was extremely angry, as if the vitality of the heavens and the earth were gathered here. She couldn't help but stepped forward and entered the first courtyard of the house, but when she stepped in, Xia Xiao was fascinated by the scenery inside. I saw that the stone path in the courtyard is quiet and the flowers and plants are prosperous. Although it is early spring, the bonsai are mainly green, pomegranate trees, oleanders, golden osmanthus and silver osmanthus, azaleas, gardenias, and flowers and trees. Bright. In addition, the lotus pond, the goldfish pond, the gardens are scattered with life, and the houses are ancient and elegant. Glanced briefly, Xia Xiao concluded that if Mr. Tang who lived here, if he presided over everything in this courtyard, then he must be a scholar of Feng Shui University. Anyhow, Xia Xiao also took an elective course on Feng Shui theory when she was in college. Even if she didn't use Tianyuan, she could see that every furnishing in this courtyard was very particular about its location. However, after seeing it with the eyes of heaven, Xia Xiao found that every piece of furnishings in this courtyard had attraction and gathering effect on the anger in the courtyard, which made her even more convinced that the Feng Shui theory is indeed true. Having seen the Feng Shui in the courtyard, Xia Xiao is really interested in this Mr. Tang who wants to see him today. In her previous life, she had no intersection with this old Mr. Tang, and she didn't even know his surname Tang. Because he wanted to recuperate in the village, he built a house in Hushan. Although he gave the villagers a generous compensation, Xiaoqiuoxi often nags at home, and every time he drank, he would scold him a few words. I look down on those powerful, and poor Mr. Tang, in the eyes of Xiaoqiuoxi, is a typical example of being rich and powerful. Xiaoqiuoxi even more severely warned Xia Xiao that he would usually go up the mountain to play and stay far away from this house. Xia Xiao was very afraid of Grandpa at that time, so naturally he didn't dare not listen to him. Later, she paid little attention to the matter of Hushan, and didn't even know when the people inside moved out. Today, when old Uncle Wang suggested that it was Mr. Tang who wanted to see Xia Xiao, after Xia Guo was suspicious, he naturally refused. Fortunately, Professor Zhou was present and persuaded him with a few words, "Brother Xia, I heard that Mr. Tang is also in 60s. In terms of age, he is older than you. He has inconvenient legs and feet. It's the elders, if you refuse, it's not justified in terms of etiquette, right? Professor Zhou is worthy of being a professor at Jingcheng University, and he is very helpful in persuading people. Xiaoguo loves face and takes great respect for the number of respects and gifts, so he reluctantly relaxes. Actually, even if Xiaoqiuoxi disagrees today, Xia Xiao will still find a way out and follow old Uncle Wang up the mountain. Perhaps because of the opening of the eyes of the sky, even if he could not predict what happened to him, Xia Xiao felt that his intuition was much sharper than before. She has an intuition that the matter of going up the mountain today is very important to herself. She is not sure how important it is, but her instinct tells her that she must come. Xia Xiao took a few deep breaths of the fresh air in the yard. Seeing that old Uncle Wang hadn't come out, she planned to go around in the yard again. At this moment, she suddenly heard a noise from the front yard. Kong dang! Next, the old man wailed. Oh yo yo! My old bone wow! Xia Xiao was startled. Hearing that the voice came from the main courtyard where he entered the second time before, he said nothing, and ran over. Look at the full text of the first novel without error, 69 books www.mtlnovel.com, your best choice. The scenery in the front yard was more elegant than the front yard, but Xia Xiao didn't have time to look at the scenery. Under the platform of the main room, a grey-haired old man with a wheelchair turned over on the ground, as if he couldn't fall. Light! Xia Xiao hurried over. The old man lay on the ground, the wheelchair pressed on him. Xia Xiao hurried to move the wheelchair when he saw it. Although she is young, she can't move the wheelchair, but I don't know why, this wheelchair is surprisingly heavy. After moving a few times, Xia Xiao found that the side of the wheelchair was pressed by the old man, and he couldn't move it. In desperation, Xia Xiao had to run in front of the old man to help him pick up the wheelchair that was pressing on him, and said with difficulty, "Come out." She talked while holding the wheelchair, for fear that one could not hold on and would fall down and hit the old man. Because she was too focused, she did not see the old man lying on the ground secretly looking back at her. She saw that her small face was flushed, but her brows were frowning, and her expression was firm. It seemed that she wouldn't be able to save the old man. "We'll let go." The old man nodded slightly, his piercing eyes suddenly turned, and wailed, "Oh! You girl! Didn't you see my old man in a wheelchair? I can't move my legs and feet. Ouch!" Xia Xiao was immediately depressed, and said in his heart, "I can't move my legs and feet," but the shout is full of breath. Haven't you seen her short-handed now? It is not easy for her to stand for so long. Depressed, but Xia Xiao has not yet reached the point of letting go. After all, the other party is an old man, and it is true that she fell to the ground with inconvenient legs and feet. She would not care about an old man who was in trouble. Therefore, Xia Xiao had to move to the side, put the weight of the wheelchair on her shoulder, supported it with one hand, and pushed the other hand to the back of the old man, using the strength of the milk to push it out. But even if an old man of more than 100 caddies is an adult, it is not easy to push it with one hand, let alone the current Xia Xiao. In the cold days of early spring, gradually, Xia Xiao oozes sweat from her forehead, and her shoulder is extremely painful from the knock of the wheelchair, and she is almost unable to support her. At this moment, the old man's body seemed to move outward. Xia Xiao was overjoyed and put more effort into her hands. At this time, the old man seemed to have come to rest. Although he could not move his legs and feet, he supported the ground with his hands and slowly moved out. As soon as he moved out, Xia Xiao breathed a sigh of relief, and instantly lost her strength. The wheelchair carried on her shoulders shook, and she was about to smash down, pressing her underneath. Xia Xiao's hand was suddenly caught. The old man's hands were distinct and hard as iron tongs. Xia Xiao was taken aback. When he felt suspicious, the sky was spinning, and then he heard a series of sounds in the yard. Kong dang! Boom! What? Xia Xiao was ripped out by the old man and fell to the ground. The back of her head was unbiased and knocked on the back of the platform. The pain made her tears almost burst out, and her eyes turned black, and a row of gold stars turned randomly. Xia Xiao suddenly began to wonder if her instincts were so accurate. Today is her unlucky day at all, this old man is simply her nemesis. Furthermore, at that moment, she had to be suspicious. The old man's hands are clearly martial arts. Xia Xiao knew this because Xia Qiuoxi was a veteran and knew how to fight a few hands. His hands were so distinct that they were like iron tongs. She can assure that this old man must be a practicing family. With this speculation, Xia Xiao could not help but suspicious of the old man's fall just now. A martial artist who rolls down from his wheelchair, howling like this? Moreover, the old man's wailing just now was very angry. Is this kidding yourself? But what's the intention? Just as Xia Xiao was suspicious, she saw old Uncle Wang running out of the next room. Mr. Don! Whoops, Mr. Don! Are you okay? Uncle Wang said as he quickly helped up the wheelchair, and took the old man to sit again. Xia Xiao was even more suspicious in her heart, because old Uncle Wang ran out of the west wing. He was here to find this old man named Tang, who was clearly in the yard. How did he find the house? And if he had been in the house just now, how could he not hear the old man falling down? Xia Xiao frowned. In a scene where she used her heavenly eyes to predict today's events in her memory, old Uncle Wang and this Mr. Tang were talking in the room, but this has not happened now. Could it be that old Uncle Wang went into the yard and found the old man? The two of them discussed in the house for a while and acted out the play? Xia Xiao's guess was not wrong, and old Uncle Wang was also puzzled at this time. He entered the yard and found Elder Tang in the house. Not only was he okay, he also told him to sit in the house for a while, and for a while, no matter what happened in the yard, he would not get out of the house. Then, he saw Mr. Tang falling to the ground by himself, and Xia Xiao ran from a distance, and with great effort, he rescued Mr. Tang from the wheelchair. But seeing Xia Xiaokan on the stone platform, old Uncle Wang couldn't stay in the house anymore. Xia Qiuoxi's stinky and hard temper is famous in the village. He didn't want his granddaughter to come up to the mountain to see Elder Tang today. Now Elder Tang knocks his granddaughter. If the child goes home and tells her grandfather, he is still not a human being, the village chief. Old Uncle Wang helped Elder Tang and hurried to help Xia Xiao, but to his surprise, she just patted the dust on her body and stood up. It didn't seem to be a big problem, and she didn't want to wow like ordinary children. He cried loudly and ran back to complain, but his expression was indifferent, but he kept rubbing the back of his head with his hands. This kind of indifference, in the eyes of old Uncle Wang, is incredible. Can this kid be stupefied? Little Shaizai. Did your child fall in the end? It's just a word. Old Uncle Wang knelt down and swayed holding Xia Xiao. This child was brought up to the mountain by him. If something really happened, how could he explain to Lao Xia's family? Old Uncle Wang, I'm okay. Xia Xiao was speechless, that is, her pain points when she fell, and now she is better. The strange thing is that she fell so hard just now that she didn't have a bag on the back of her head. But if she is shaken so much by old Uncle Wang, she will be dizzy sooner or later. It's okay? Really okay? Old Uncle Wang touched the back of Xia Xiao's head uncertainly, and found that he really didn't fall out of the bag, so he exhaled and felt relieved. Until Xia Xiao was free from the vigorous shaking of old Uncle Wang, she didn't look at the old man in a wheelchair next to her. I was surprised at this look. I saw the old man with grey hair, ruddy complexion, bright eyes, no anger and prestige, and a finger-long grey beard on his chin. The whole person looked like a fairy bone, but he had the breath of a worldly expert. Xia Xiao's eyes narrowed slightly. Where does this ruddy face look like a patient? It seems to be full of energy. She became more sure that she had been tricked just now. Hee hee. At this moment, the old man laughed, and his voice was vigorous and energetic. Old village chief, thank you for bringing this child up the mountain today. There is tea in the west wing room. Please go and sit in the room for a while. I have something to say with this kid. Okay? Xia Xiao and old Uncle Wang were both taken aback. The old man had already turned the wheelchair by himself, got on the platform and entered the main room. His voice came from his back. "Girl, follow me to the house."